Católica Luis Amigó les da la bienvenida a este evento, el que podrán disfrutar a través del servicio webinar de la plataforma Zoom. Queremos darles algunas recomendaciones para el uso correcto de las herramientas que tenemos en pantalla. Tienes la opción de chatear, un espacio en el que puedes interactuar con los demás participantes, ya sea para saludar, hacer comentarios, aportes o acotaciones durante la videoconferencia. El siguiente icono que tienes a la derecha es una mano en la cual puedes hacer clic sobre ella y levantar la mano. Esta opción es una manera de pedir la palabra e informar que necesitas hablar. Recuerda que no siempre será atendida esta solicitud. Esto depende de la dinámica del evento y el tiempo que los expositores manejen. En caso de ser aceptada tu solicitud para hablar, lo siguiente que debes hacer es elegir la opción Cancelar silenciar ahora. Una vez lo hayas hecho, tu micrófono estará activado para que hagas tu intervención. A continuación, tienes la opción de preguntas y respuestas, el espacio ideal para formular alguna de tus preguntas relacionadas con el tema del evento. Estas preguntas serán atendidas con su respectiva respuesta por alguno de los panelistas especializados en el tema. Recuerda que este espacio es exclusivamente para resolver preguntas. De esta manera ya sabes cómo usar correctamente las herramientas de Zoom cuando participes de un webinar. Esperamos que disfrutes de este evento.
Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to our Diálogo académico, Perspectivas interculturales en la formación de profesores de lenguas extranjeras. This is a space that our Licenciatura has conceived and created for having conversations around topics that are of interest for teachers and their professional development. We are really happy. Right now we have 98 attendees, and that makes us, wow, like really happy to see that you are answering to this invitation. Today we have, like, I'm going to say, lovely people sharing their knowledge with us, and I am going to ask them to turn their cameras on so we can say hi to them, and I like properly like introduce them. So we have Juan Camilo Suárez Franco. He's one of our teachers, and he's going to be in charge of having this conversation with Professor Carlo and Professor José Aldemar, right? Let me talk a little bit about José Aldemar. José Aldemar Álvarez Valencia, I'm sorry, is a professor at the School of Language Sciences at Universidad del Valle, here in Colombia. He holds a master's degree and a PhD degree in second language acquisition and teaching from the University of Arizona. He is the coordinator of the emphasis in LT education in the interinstitutional doctoral program at Universidad del Valle. José Aldemar has published in the areas of discourse analysis, critical discourse analysis, language policy, language teaching approaches, teacher education, intercultural communication, and multimodality. And he is a member of the board of directors of the Colombian Association of Teachers of English, ASOCOPI. It is important to tell you that Universidad Católica Luis Amigó belongs also to ASOCOPI. Welcome, José Aldemar. And we have Professor Carlo Granados Beltrán. He holds a PhD degree in education from Santo Tomás University, a master's degree in British Cultural Studies and English teaching from the University of Warwick, and a master's in linguistics, in applied linguistics to the teaching of English from Universidad Distrital. Currently, Professor Granados is the academic director of the BA in bilingualism at Universidad Única and the president of the National Board of Directors of the Colombian Association of Teachers of English, ASOCOPI. Carlo has been a professor at Universidad Central, Universidad Pedagógica Nacional, Universidad Javeriana, and the master's degree, and professor also at the master's degree in language teaching at UPTC. Thank you, Professor Carlos, for being here. We thank ASOCOPI because we had this invitation directly to as a COPI board of directors, and as a program, we are really happy to have this conversation today. And we also are here sharing the screen and the floor with our director, Diana Marcela Jaramillo Cataño. And I don't know if she wants to say hi to this community before starting this event. I'm just improvising. I love to improvise. Okay.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you to Jose Aldemar and Carlo for being here today and for accepting this invitation and for sharing their ideas and concepts and experience. So thank you and welcome to this talk.
Okay. So after like having said hello to everybody, to our 122 participants right now, we are like ready to start. So Juan Camilo, Carlo, and Jose Aldemar, I love this sentence. The floor is yours. Okay. So let's start.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. We are going to start now with this interesting experience we have, right? Welcome to our academic dialogue. Its name is Perspectivas interculturales en la formación de profesores en lenguas extranjeras. Again, let me introduce myself. My name is Juan Camilo Suarez Franco. Pleased to be here sharing this experience with the teachers here, Carlo and Jose Aldemar. I am English teacher and I am graduate from this amazing institution, so I am proudly Amigoniano. I'm gonna be the caller, the moderator in this event we have today. And I hope that our audience enjoy and learn with our guest and with the topic, which is really interesting, right? Which is very important and interesting, okay? Absolutely relevant. We're going to discuss about interculturality and its relationship with English teaching. By the way, I would like to say hello. I would like to greet the teachers. Teacher Jose Aldemar, thank you very much for being here. How do you feel today, teacher?
I'm great, you know, like see what comes out of this dialogue.
Great, that's amazing. That's very nice. Thank you for contributing to our academic community. And I want also to say hello to teacher Carlo. Teacher, how do you feel today?
I feel very well and I feel thankful for being here. Thank you for the invitation.
All right, thanks a lot for being here with us, okay? So dear audience, feel free to participate in our dialogue. This is a conversation, right? We want to have different views and we are going to receive your comments and questions according to you feel that you want to ask or you want to say something, okay? Before starting to talk about our today's topic, I would like to introduce it by sharing a quote that I found that was said by Robert Alan Arthur. Robert Alan Arthur was an American screenwriter and film director who said about interculturality that he said, cultural differences should not separate us from each other, but rather cultural diversity brings a collective strength that can benefit all of humanity. Also, intercultural dialogue is the best guarantee of a more peaceful, just and sustainable world. And I want to start with this quote because I think that it's fundamental that we understand our commitment with our society in the exercise of our mission as teachers, okay? And then I would like to say that we have a particular context that is, well, we live in a global world because of different circumstances, right? But especially because life is multicolor, right? Life is diverse. It's something natural, it's something normal. We are not like seeing that it is in a different way. We are all different. That is something natural and we should learn to live that, okay? Some years ago, I used to think that diversity was just an European or North American phenomenon, right? Like, yes, they have a lot of multiculturalism because of that different people from diverse continents converging to those places. That was my thought in that moment. But nowadays, we can be aware of what is going on in our own context. in South America and specifically in our country, right, in Colombia. For example, the immigrants, right? The immigrants are a good example, and if I may, I could call them refugees who come from different nations due to their social issues, and that come for part of our diversities. So we have like a new diversity because in our context, we are also having immigrants that we are receiving, especially from countries like Venezuela, for example, but it is not only Venezuela, okay? Nevertheless, that is also a mistaken perspective. At least it's a little bit reductionist, because before that, we already had a diversity in our classrooms, okay? So it is not something new. We have different people in our classroom, and that is part of our history. In the end, our classes are not homogeneous, but they are absolutely heterogeneous, right? And we have different people in our classroom, and that is the reality. That is what is going on in our context, okay? That is the first part of what I want to say. On the other hand, we decided to work as English teachers, and we are supposed to face that reality. I mean, having diversity as a natural aspect of society, when teaching this language, we realize that we do more than teaching language skills. We teach going shopping, of course, we teach that. We can teach daily routine, yes, good. Hailing a taxi at the airport, etc., etc. But we also teach about cultures. We also teach about cultures. That's like an advantage that I see in my own practice, okay? Likewise, we see and learn about not only interculturality as the, let's call it coexistence of diversity, right? But also the intercultural communication competence that we have there. And we can say about this intercultural communication competence that is like a ability to engage in productive intercultural dialogues of meaning and relationships with people from different cultural backgrounds, right? We can also see that we have this context when we talk about teaching languages. So teaching English is also teaching about cultures, and then teaching to respect other ways of life. That is also part of it. And we should respect our own culture, of course, because our culture is as important as any other culture is. Now that we are aware of that, we English teachers are called to contribute to interculturality, to favor respect for otherness, subjectivity, and diversity, right? Then we would have like an initial question here that would be, how can we do it? And I hope we can solve that question today. That's one of the ideas that we have, okay? In this framework, we want to start talking, and I want to ask teachers Carlo and Jose Aldemar if they can help us to establish a difference between two concepts that are frequently used as synonyms, but they are not. They are multiculturalism and interculturality, okay? So thank you. Teacher Carlo, if you can please share your ideas about it, would be great.
Okay, thank you. Well, as you said, we have worked or we have listened to those concepts as synonyms, right? Interculturality and multiculturality or multiculturalism. As I was telling you before, that depends a lot on the position that you take and on the author that you're following. So as I was telling, I work with critical interculturality mostly and the colonial position. And then when we think of multiculturality, it's like this concept coming from a European perspective, or sometimes an American perspective, when we talk about the melting pot, or when we think that a country is multicultural because it has different groups in the territory. So for example, in the States, they talk about this melting pot because they have Latinos, they have Chinese, they have Irish, etc., and they have these groups. Same in France or same in England, which they have Pakistanis, Indians, Jamaicans. But one limitation of that multiculturality is that the groups do not integrate. They are isolated. right? They live there in the same place, but they don't really interact with one another, and they see each other with suspicion. While in interculturality, or in this utopian idea of interculturality, the groups would be integrated and they would interact with one another. They would be somehow mixed, right? That would be the idea. Also, with the part of critical interculturality is the fact that, yes, probably the groups interact with one another, but we don't normally see, or we ignore the differences that there are in terms of power, and in terms of the benefits they can have access to, or the services that they get, or how they are perceived by other people. Those power differentials are ignored in critical interculturality that is perceived, or is problematized, to say somehow, right?
Yeah, it is really interesting, the view that you gave us about that, because I have heard many people talking about it without like a specific distinction of it, right? So I consider as an important thing to talk about it. Now that we had what teacher Carlo said about this difference, I would like to hear what Jose Aldemar can say about it. Teacher Jose, please.
Juan Camilo, a quick question is that for some reason I lost some of what you said. So we are distinguishing between multiculturality and interculturality, right?
Yes, it is.
Well, I don't really have much to add to the definitions that Carlo gave regarding multiculturality. What I would say is that when you look at the literature, is a concept that was initially coined in the US, and that's why he talks about the melting pot, while in Europe they were talking about since the very beginning intercultural approaches, and then the common reference talked about pluriculturality. But it basically distinguishes as, what I would like to say is that the intercultural perspective comes in different flavors, or let's say is a very nuanced view. And for some people, Carlo has also discussed this in one of his papers. Some people talk about, Catherine Walsh actually talks about a relational interculturality, which is basically the same as the multicultural approach, like groups of communities that gather together, they coexist, but they kind of like, like they live together, but they're not trying to engage too much because they know that issues can arise. And then she also talks about functional interculturality, which is basically the kind of interculturality that is proclaimed by many people, which is the idea of let's live in peace, let's interact, let's respect each other, let's live in a harmonious space and tolerate each other and understand each other. And but then she says that kind of functional interculturality doesn't shake the system, It's like learn to live with all of the, let's say, injustice, colonial resonances that we live with, and be happy with that, but at least try to live peacefully in the group. And then there's the other nuance, which is the critical perspective that Carlos aligns with, and that one that is more emancipatory, that one that is decolonial, that one that is telling you it's right to try to live with the other peacefully, but why don't you both try to deconstruct those invisible forces that kind of like or what I call semiotic regimes that rule your lives, And why don't you try to see what are the things that are not allowed by those structures, and see if they have a space. When I say what are those things that are not allowed, I'm talking about gender, I'm talking about epistemologies that are not legitimized, I'm talking about languages that are not legitimized, that do not have the same exchange value in front of dominant languages or dominant semiotic regimes. We will expand more on this if you people, I'm pretty sure people are getting questions, but we still have some time so we could discuss more on these issues.
Great, that was great. Thank you very much for that concept. So according to what you said, we can say that when we take the different cultures and we allow them to interact, to share their beliefs and perspective, we are close to interculturality, right? And if we promote scenarios where those diverse cultures enrich each other, we achieve interculturality. So then we can speak about it, because it is not only like having people together to talk about it. It's more than that, according to what you said. Yes, thank you very much.
Just one more comment that it's important to get it from the beginning. If we're talking in terms of language classes or any kind of education, one of the highlights or landmarks of the intercultural approach is that it is transformative. You know, like, you know, when you teach culture or you approach culture in certain ways that are more transmissive, you know, factual information and stuff, that does not transform the subject. Interculturality is transformative. Even functional interculturality is transformative, only that it is not emancipatory.
I want to add to that Jose is saying. He mentioned the three dimensions or the three kinds of interculturality Walsh describes, right? Like the relational, the functional, and the critical. Here, as probably this might sound wrong, but as we tend to follow fashions, as I was telling you before, in the 90s, all our constitutions started saying like, we are plurilingual and multicultural or pluricultural. But as I told you, it was more in the sense of function for obtaining benefits, right? It's like, I recognize you belong to this country as an indigenous community or as an Afro community, but as I recognized you, then as a state, I have the right to exploit the resources that you have. That is the issues that we have with indigenous people in Cauca, indigenous people in Guajira, and in many other places, because it's like, as I recognize you, that legitimizes that I exploit you. It's functional and not really intercultural, right? The other thing that I wanted to say is that even though multiculturalism has this like American or European taste, there are authors who also make the distinctions between different kinds of multiculturalism. There is one, I think he's a politologist. Well, he works with political science. That is Bhikkhu Parekh. He's from India, and he makes a taxonomy of multiculturalism according to the countries, because not all the countries approach multiculturalism in the same way. So for people that want to explore, I'm going to write the name here in the chat if they want to explore more on that topic.
Carlos, and I think some authors kind of like fighting back that reductionist view of the multicultural approach. They have proposed critical multiculturalism, for example.
Yes,
Shirley Steinberg talks on that, works in that direction.
Yes, Bhikkhu Parekh also talks about, in the taxonomy he makes, he has one that is more, let us say, aligned with emancipatory nature a little bit, or they also talk about this idea of cosmopolitanism, like in which we are citizens of the world.
Oh, great, thank you for that. We're gonna check it, because it also depends on the context where you are located to analyze these situations. Okay, well, after this short discussion, I would like to start talking about our questions, the questions that we have today. Okay, I would like to start with this question, which includes inclusion, the concept of inclusion there. Okay, so how are inclusion and interculturality similar or different, and how is this relationship portrayed inside the language classroom? Teacher Carlo.
All right. I think what has happened in our context is that inclusion has become associated with people with disabilities. or learning difficulties, right? And interculturality is more associated with cultural diversity, like indigenous communities, Afro-descendant people, women, transgender, gay, lesbians, etc. But there is something that is discussed in the field of cultural studies, and it's thinking of the body as not only in its natural perspective, like in biological terms, but also the body as something that is culturally constructed. So in that sense, disability could also be included in interculturality in a way, right? Also because our bodies are regulated because of culture. Let us, for example, of how we end up saying, well, I say we generically, I don't say it we say it that way. Like you throw as a girl, you throw like a girl. Or when they tell a man, you don't have to sit in that way. That's not manly, right? Or, well, how we regulate the body in terms of beauty, what's considered beautiful and what not, right? In that sense, disability could also be considered somehow a minority identity, is what Tobin Sievers says. So it would make part, for me, but probably I'm mistaken, it could be included also in interculturality. Because interculturality, let us say, if we take it from a critical perspective or in a cultural studies perspective, works with understanding culture as a site of a struggle between different groups, like whites and non-whites, men, women, poor and rich, right? In this case would be disabled and able. And there is a focus on ableism, like we focus more on people who are able than on people who are disabled. So that would be my approach to that.
Yeah, good. I want to say something about it from my own experience. And, you know, I worked for 10 years in an institution where inclusion was one of its cornerstones. And our work was strongly focused on that, was strongly focused on disabilities, if you allow me to say that concept. However, I never heard the concept interculturality. And we just were working on functional diversity. Functional diversity is one of the concepts that it's like mentioned to name this situation of disabilities now, especially in Europe. And I mean, I learned a lot about working with autism, attention deficit, mental delay, among others, but I never heard about cultural diversity. And that is something important that I think we could analyze in the framework that you already said. I agree with that, teacher Carlo. Thank you much for that. Teacher Jose Aldemar, what's your position about it?
Okay, so I think Carlo has provided a good introduction to the topic when he talks about the idea that inclusion has, not only in Colombia, but is historically, inclusion has historically been associated with disability. And I just, briefly say that if you go back in history, and you can even check on Foucault, who talks about all of this, in the Middle Ages, disabled people, and I am not going to say disabled because nowadays that concept is even criticized. Now we're talking about the concept of functional diversity, and this has to do with what Carlos said, the concept of, quotes, disability as a form of diversity. So now the concept that we're trying to, because I believe in it, is to use the concept of functional diversity. And in the Middle Ages, functional diversity was seen, of course, as something that was aberrant, and people who had any kind of functional disability was seen as someone who was possessed by the evil, and that was excluded socially. And later they were even used for circus attraction. If you've seen, for example, in movies, you see that circus attractions were usually people with functional diversities. And some others later in the 15th century, they were taken to nursing homes, they were taken to prisons or orphanage houses. And then after the French Revolution, if you go back in time, you would see that because of the of the Human Rights Declaration, the people with functional disabilities were considered in a different view. So, and they were trying to integrate them in educational systems, though they were separated. They were still separated. But there was in the 19th century, a special education, the concept of special education appeared. And so people with functional diversities were considered people who could learn and could change, you know, as if their functional diversity was something that made them bad. And so many centers of specialized, they call specialized centers of disability. Then if you see later in the, after the Second World War, with all of these former military people, they started talking about that and how to make physical, cognitive, and sensorial functional diversities integrated in language in regular classes. So this is kind of like the moment when they start talking about include people in regular classes, you know, not treat them like separate, because that's kind of segregationalist. And this is pretty much landed in the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where in the part of education, they talked about what to do with people with functional diversities. And so what Carlo was saying is that, and then later, there was this movement in the 60s, I think, called Movimiento de la Vida Independiente, and it's all of these people with functional diversity saying, you know, like we can have a normal, a regular life. And you know, I like to kind of like dig a little bit more on the concept, because I think it's important to understand it. You know, why do we say that someone is diverse? Because diverse means that you can do things in a different way. And that's why we think about functional diversity, because if I can't speak, I use sign language. So it's the same function, but it's in a different way. It's in a diverse way. So it's a functional diversity, right? If I can walk, I can use any material object or an artifact that will help me function, which is to walk. So it's basically, I can do the same thing, just that in a different way. So it's diverse, right? It's just a diverse way of doing it. So, and okay, so that's kind of like and then all of these expanded later to the idea that it is not only people with functional diversity, but it's also other groups who do not have the same access to education. And then this expanded to say that in the educational field, they started talking about inclusive education, the ability to empower and value diversity, you know, protecting and understanding the particularities of students, promoting respect for being different, and ensuring community participation, or the participation in the community of people with these conditions or with this kind of diversities. So how does this relate to interculturality? Well, I think that the intersection is diversity, right? And so, and then we'll have to define that, then what is interculturality? And the way I think of interculturality, I see interculturality as a perspective about the encounter and the relationships between people with different meaning-making systems. And just for those who, you know, don't know part of what I work on, my work is, the stance that I always take is from the social semiotic perspective. And so I'm always talking about meaning making. You know, human beings, what we do every day is construct, negotiate, and meanings, right? And so that's why I say that this perspective of interculturality is a perspective about the encounter and the relationships between people with different meaning-making systems, with different interpretive frameworks. And of course, when you think of interculturality, it is that, you know, people with different diverse ways of doing, thinking, and being in the world getting together, and that includes their corporality, because the human being, as Carlos was saying, is embodied, right? It's corporeal. We cannot deny that, because at all times we are corporeal. So That's the way I see the connection between the two concepts. Sorry about the extension of mine.
No, thank you a lot. It was nice to hear that, what you said, okay? Diana, I would like to, sorry, Claudia, I would like to know if we have some questions or comments to tell,
far,
because...
No,
yeah.
so far we have like comments from our attendees. Well, they are very happy with this space, right? And they have been writing like that cultural diversity is widely explored and implemented by internationalization of higher education under internationalization at home perspective, right? And what they are saying is that that is like an excuse that they have, or that they have created to take the students developing intercultural competences. That is so far one of like the things. It's difficult for me. I'm being reading, but no questions yet. But I have a question. I don't know if you're going to be talking about that now or later, but I would like maybe during this dialogue to start thinking about like, what are we going to do? I mean, I am a teacher, right? I'm learning about this. So what is going to be one of my, allow me to say, homework? What do I have to do in order to understand these new perspectives, and also to start like deconstructing these invisible like forces that I had also created in my classes, or that I have assumed from other things? Because every time I'm listening to you, I'm thinking about my teaching practice. So I don't know if allow this discussion or this nice conversation, you will give us some hints.
Yeah, and by the way,
the question was mine,
our...
actually.
All right, no, but it's perfect because it's really close to our next question. So thank you for the introduction, Claudia. The second question that I would like to discuss with you, it's what should English teachers do to favor interculturality in the classroom? Teacher
Okay.
Carlo, please.
Okay, I think one first step, and I think we all have to go through that, is that a reflection upon ourselves and what we do. Because I'm not saying that everybody, but we tend to have certain prejudices, and we take them to the classes. So in a way, I like the way Jose said that we have to deconstruct certain things. So we also have to deconstruct ourselves, right? Like, what are the prejudices that I have? Why do I have them? And how do I like somehow work with them to suspend them or to change them when I become a teacher, right? Because I cannot go with prejudices into a class. The other thing that I would mention is that it might sound obvious, but we have to know our students, right? Like where they come from, their life stories, their families, their background, so as to be able to incorporate that into our classes, so that they see themselves represented in the classes, right? That it's not like, for example, it is common that in the books we always talk about this aspirational idea of foreign countries and everything's perfect, and they have to talk about Tokyo or Los Angeles or any of those things, but they are not familiar with that. So it's how, okay, we incorporate that information because probably it is important for them to know it, but also how do we incorporate what they are familiar with, what is common in their context, what is meaningful for them. I think that's another step. I would say that. I would let Jose talk, and then I will mention some more things so that I don't take over all the ideas.
Okay. Well, so what?
Right. Thank you, Teacher Carlo. So, Teacher Jose, please.
How do we favor interculturality in the classroom? I would say that it depends on how we define interculturality, right? Because for some people, interculturality is defined from a transnational perspective, you know, and when it comes to a language classroom, in a foreign language classroom, they think that the intercultural is because they are teaching English. So the encounter between the two communities, transnational communities, that materializes interculturality. And so I think that the first thing to do is that we have to expand and adopt a more fine-grained view of what interculturality is. And also, you know, like we talked about interculturality, but we have not talked about the concept of culture. Yes, because for you to adopt an intercultural perspective, you must have a definition of what culture is. And what I'm going to say here again is from the perspective of social semiotics, you know, because the definition I have of social of culture varies a little bit. I see culture as an open and dynamic repertoire of semiotic resources. And when I say semiotic resources, I refer to material, bodily, originated, or artifacts. You know, when you speak, language is a semiotic resource, right? Artifacts like painting, all of these things are semiotic resources we use to make meaning. And also non-material resources like discourses, like ideologies, ideas, beliefs. And they are all produced, they are embodied, you know, enacted, but they are also reshaped in social interaction. That's what culture is, you know, all of those semiotic resources you have in your mind that you have learned through socialization in your communities, and then you acquire and you use as a resource to interact with people and make meaning. Cool thing is that we can reshape them, we can redress them, we can negotiate them, and we can change them. Otherwise, culture would not be dynamic and open, right? But still, the weight of tradition is heavy on people, you know? It's always a challenge to be making changes in culture. But when I'm saying, and what is this taking me? My argument is taking me to say that all of the semiotic resources human beings have appropriated they have exchange values, right? Some or they have more capital, as what you used to say, they have more capillary, you know, symbolic capital. So what semiotic resource has more exchange value? An indigenous language or Spanish or English. They all have different exchange values, and in that way they are legitimized, right? And what semiotic resource has more value? A heterogeneous, heterosexual person, or the idea of heterosexuality versus homosexuality, right? All of these resources, the ways we embody our identities and we enact identities, have exchange value. And so when students get to our classrooms, those differentials in exchange values are noticed, you know. So the kid doesn't want to use his native language because, oh, no, this is gonna be badly seen because it doesn't have the same exchange value. And the same with this gender identities. So like, no, I don't want anybody to know that I am not heterosexual, because then I'm gonna have everybody bullying me. And things like this, you know, all of the semiotic resources we have, or I don't want people to know that I don't have, like, I don't go over the weekends to the cinema because I don't have enough money, because I have a different sociocultural condition. So all of these things that don't allow students to be authentic in the classroom. And what I think we could do is to try, I am using the concept of Pippa Stein in South Africa. And she uses the concept of resourcing resources. I love that, because she says all of the resources that our students bring, as Carlo was saying, that, you know, get to know your students, get to know who they are, what are the semiotic resources they bring with them, and then what you have to do, try to recognize them by resourcing them, you know, giving them the power. In other words, she describes that the idea of resourcing is by saying that it's a process of recognition, rearticulation, of recovery of students' lost or silent voices, and the ways of knowing or being. Yes, so as Carlo was saying, if we were able to recognize those resources and make them available in the classroom and send the message that diversity is allowed in this classroom, right? That's how interculturality can be permeated in the classroom, not only language classroom, any classroom,
in any
because
classroom.
my perspective is communication and meaning making for education, not only foreign language.
I want to complement what Jose is saying. I agree completely. Like the we define interculturality in cultural studies, we talk about maps of meaning, and that groups have their own maps of meaning. Well, we can first understand the maps of meaning that people have, that our groups have, but at certain point we also have to challenge the maps of meaning that they have. For example, what Jose was saying about, for example, different sexual orientations, or about social classes, is like make them notice that probably certain things that are inscribed in their maps of meaning are not completely true, right? Because same as teachers, students also sometimes arrive at school with prejudices, or at university. In my case, it's at university. So thinking, for example, that being poor is your fault, or that having a different sexual orientation is because you are a pervert. So we have to somehow challenge those senses that they have. Also, I have here one suggestion from an author who works with culturally responsive pedagogy, that is Gay, 2010. And he says, what can we do if we want to implement culturally responsive pedagogy? That is basically, how do we start implementing interculturality in our classrooms? So it says, using students' cultural knowledge, prior experiences, frames of reference, and performance styles of culturally diverse students to make learning encounters more relevant to and effective for them. So basically what Jose and I were saying before, like we have to get to know our students so that we can use the resources that they have. I like this idea of resourcing. And those resources, well, they come from their experiences, their prior experiences, their context, their cultural knowledge, their different performances, so that they can connect with what we are implementing in classes.
Yeah, and I would say that it's also important to let them be, and to let them discover who they are, because it's something fundamental then. Claudia, I would like to interact with people, right?
We have several questions. Allow me to read them. Okay, we have a question by Nidia Joana Rincon, and she's asking, she says, I would like to know the role of the teacher as a cultural ambassador into an interculturality classroom. Does it differ from a regular class? That's like her question. Also, we have a question for Mr. Álvarez. Professor Álvarez says, question to Mr. Álvarez. Has he had experience to teach in the States and in Colombia? What differences has he seen and lived, taking into account that most of the students in a foreign language classroom are usually from different countries, and in Colombia they are usually from the same country? What would be different challenges in both cases? I have another question, so if you want me, I read them and then we elaborate. I mean, you elaborate around them. And then it says, yes, I would like to know if you have done research in the classroom by which, oh my God, I got lost. Yes, by which you take your students to develop or strengthen intercultural competence along with the students from across the globe. Oh my God, we have a lot of questions now. And then we said, what should schools apply? Inclusion or interculturality? Both? And then it says, to what extent an excessive emphasis on the symbolic and cultural deconstruction and resignification of the body, particularly as regards the recent conceptualization of gender, could be contributing to the denial of natural differences between males and females that, instead of being celebrated and embraced, seem to be leading new generations to the desperate need to intervene and modify, oh my God, their body, I guess? Yes, their body, right? Yes. So I think we could start with those questions and then I look for the others, right?
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
So
the floor is yours.
I'm going to read the first, and then Jose, if you want to start.
Sure.
I would like to know the role of the teacher as a cultural ambassador into an interculturality classroom. Does it differ from a regular class?
You wanna go or I go?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know. You know, when you say cultural ambassador, I think I don't know. The concept of ambassador doesn't I don't feel fond of it. I feel more like a mediator. And because ambassador seems like you're bringing something to representing someone, and I think that in a classroom, with you have all when you start looking interculturally, and that's why I said in my previous participation, I said that we have to expand the idea of interculturality from the transnational to a more fine grain. And when I mean fine grain, what I mean is that the culture, if culture means the similar resources that a person has built through process of socialization, that means that there are different cultural affiliations that I develop on the basis of different categories. For example, gender is one category of social affiliation. When you're born, immediately, depending on your biological sex, you are immediately ingrained in the construction of social and cultural construction of the concept of gender, right? And then you start being socialized into the forms of being a man or a woman, right? And it varies from culture to culture, you know, play with cards, don't sit like that, as Carlo was saying, and all of these things. And so immediately you start creating an identity affiliation toward the idea of cultural practices that men do versus cultural practices that women do. And I always give one silly example, but I always brings the point, you know, like there's many things women do. And one of those things is, for example, they go to the bathroom together. You will never see men doing that, right? That's a silly, I always, people, you know, like you always got the same example, but it's easy. All right, so it's because men and women, we both have different socio-cultural practices. And then when I say, when women and men interact, it's possible that the intercultural element activates because they both have different sociocultural practices and affiliations. And it happens the same for religion, for ethnicity, for race. You know, if you grow as a paisa, you have sociocultural practices of paisa. Look, I grew up as a caldense. We have arepa todos los días. In the morning, arepa al desayuno. I went to Bogota and it's bread, right? It's bread, a lot of bread. And I ended up eating a lot of bread in the mornings and forgetting arepas for some time because I you know, like you start changing. That's part of being part of another community. So, so what I want to say is that if you have your intercultural kind of like device activated and you notice that everyone has that each student, because of the different identity affiliation, has different cultural practices, there will be lots of intercultural elements to see in the classroom. And then what you have to do is to discuss them in the classroom, to recognize them, and have students talk about it. You know, why would you do this? Why do you think women do this? Why do you think people from this country do this? In other words, you make the intercultural intracultural, not only discussing about, oh, the British and the Americans, all that, los paisas, los hombres, las mujeres, los que tienen afiliaciones sexual or gender identities that are different. Kids versus people who are old, because there is an intercultural transaction when a kid talks to an old person, because the old person has a whole host of different intercultural practices, while the kid is in the process of building lots of intercultural practices and building that repertoire of semiotic resources. Well, I don't know if that answered the question, but okay.
I guess Jose also pointed at something that I wanted to say. This idea of cultural ambassador sounds or seems to be associated to this idea of superficial culture, right? Probably you've read Cramsh and talking about food festivals, folklore, fashion, and I'm not saying that that is not important, but it's superficial. So we also need to work with deep culture. In that sense, I agree with what Jose is saying about becoming a mediator between cultures. And also, this role means that we need to problematize the target culture. The target culture is not perfect, right? Of course, in the books, they are going to show the best because that's the idea. Of course, they are going to show the punctuality and elegance of the British and the accent and so on and so forth, or that the Americans are very technologically oriented and they are independent, that is the country of money. But what students see in other places, in other documents, if they see the news, they are going to see that there is poverty in the United States. There is racism in the United States. If they see news about England, they are going to see the same. If they are going to see books, if they study French, they are going to see the same thing. So I think it's more than an ambassador trying to show this aspirational idea of the culture, is to show culture as it really is, both the target one and the local one, because of course ours is not perfect either. But what we end up showing when we work this idea of ambassador is that one is better than the other. So American culture is better, and it happens a lot in international schools, or British culture is better, and the goal is to go there because there everything is perfect, and we know that that is not true. So that's the issue that I have with this idea of cultural ambassador. I work more as a cultural mediator and showing culture in its totality. Well, in all its good and bad things, let us say, not totality because that will be too ambitious. Okay,
I like your point about the cultural ambassador, because you know, like when people go to the States or to another country, they're like, oh, you're the ambassador of Colombia. And I would say like, well, I am the ambassador of José Aldemar Álvarez because I cannot represent an entire country.
Exactly.
You know? But I also have to say one thing, you know, one of the characteristics for something to become cultural, you know, because you say, what is cultural then? Well, things become cultural because they have those cultural resources, they tend to reach regularities, and they produce social coordination, and this gives individuals a sense of shared behavioral orientations, values, and beliefs. So that's why they say like you're an ambassador because you represent. I was like, yes, there are certain cultural patterns and regularities in my country, but it's like I can't, because the country is so divided into different regions. Plus, I grew up in a family that has this configuration, so it's really hard for me to become an ambassador of anything. Possibly my family, not even my family.
That's right. Okay, I'm going to move to the next question that appears here. How can we work on our own way of understanding multiculturalism far from a Eurocentric perspective?
You want to take that one?
Okay. Let us say that, well, I guess that here, I mean, there is a problem, and that is theoretically we cannot disregard like European contributions to understanding of culture. I think like, for example, in the decolonial position, those who say that definitely going to get linked to any that is European is a bit difficult, and it's somehow being provincial. But what I would say is that we need to recover our own knowledge and our own developments and our own practices, or our own, I forgot how Jose mentioned that, semiotic
resources.
Semiotic resources, our own semiotic resources. In that way, we probably can take this and get rid of Eurocentric perspective, but take distance and take a more like balanced view between what's local and what's Eurocentric. Jose, you want to add to that?
Yeah, yeah. I think you know, like, totally agree with your perspective, and this is, you know, like people who are working on the colonial perspective in critical interculturality, we find difficult, at least I find difficult, to materialize the idea of detaching yourself from all of the epistemologies, the Eurocentric or the global North epistemologies, you know, because I don't know if it's not unfortunately or fortunately, it's just the condition, you know, that we grew up as part of colonial past, and our identities are totally constructed around those categories. What I think we can do is start establishing a dialogue that we could make more equitable, you know, and you know, if you remember Walsh, that she talks about the different types of coloniality that they left, you know, the coloniality of being, you know, how we don't feel like complete because we are not like the Europeans, the coloniality of knowledge, like our knowledge is not valid because it's third world knowledge. And for example, the knowledge of our indigenous communities or Afro descendant communities is not valid because it's very local, you know, it's not European, it doesn't fit within the modern project of Europe. And the coloniality of power, you know, how we are still obeying to the powers that they instilled and they put in place so many years ago. And the other one, which goes along with the indigenous view, cosmogony, which is the coloniality of Mother Nature, how they are trying to sell us this idea that nature is something to be exploited, which is part of the project of modernity, you know, dominate nature instead of live with nature as part of who you are. It's like with the idea of the dichotomy of human beings versus nature was created in order to mercantilize nature. Yes, but indigenous communities have been teaching us that for years. We are nature. There is no dichotomy. We are nature, you know. So anyways, I don't want to go more into that, but I do agree with Carlo that we don't have necessarily to, because that would go against the idea of dialogue that we're trying to establish. We cannot just delete the other, which is the European tradition, and say like, I don't want to talk more about, because that's denying our own identity. Some people are saying like, be an indigenous, like indigenize yourself. And I am wondering like, but I didn't grow up as an indigenous. But what I grew up thinking is that they are less than me because I am more European-like, you know? But what I can do is to redress, refashion that thinking, that idea, and start seeing like they have so much to offer. They have the right to be with us. We have to protect, to help, and if there is something, because we don't know, but look, many of the things we do are indigenous because we have blood, we have indigenous blood, and we have African blood in our veins, right? So we have to start recognizing that. And so many things we do because I'm working with indigenous communities right now, and I'm saying I'm working with no like
or two.
4 or 2 or whatever. I'm working, and we are in these intercultural encounters we're having. I'm really understanding like I have so much indigenous stuff that I don't recognize, and we think, oh, this is European. That's not European. That is indigenous, because they have made us think that everything we do that's kind of good is like it's because we owe it to them, and it's not like that. We have to recognize all the roots we have.
Something that I want to add to that also is that, and in the colonial perspective, they also talk about it, is this deconstructing Europe. Like Europe is not Europe just because it has certain roots in Arabic countries, like the knowledge that they developed, and in Asia. But at some point we forgot, for example, what happened in Africa, what happened in Eastern countries. So academically also, we can explore those other philosophies, those other ways of thinking that, for example, in many Eastern religions, the human being is not dual. We have this division between mind and soul that came from Descartes, but they have this connection, right? Same as in indigenous communities or in India, for example. So I think we need to explore also that part. And how do they call it? The muntu in African cultures. When you are one with nature, one with your community, one with the dead, one with the living. So I think that's important to explore. Okay, this goes directly to Jose. Question to Mr. Alvarez. Has he had the experience to teach in the States and in Colombia? What differences has he seen and lived, taking into account that most of the students in a foreign language classroom are usually from different countries? And in Colombia, they are usually all from the same country. What would be the different challenges in both cases?
Yes, I did. I did. I had the opportunity to teach in the US, and I taught two different kinds of classes. I was teaching composition, and I taught American students, and that was some courses that I taught, and I also taught international students. So, and I taught composition, but I also taught language classes, you know, regular language classes like speaking and so on and so on. In these multicultural classes, you really have to be very sensitive to differences. You know, for example, you don't want to talk to against communism when you have a class that's packed of Chinese students. Not only because it's dangerous, because many of them may feel they are not in agreement with the system, but they are afraid of talking against it because they don't know who in the classroom is going to tell on them, right? And then they have issues. And the Chinese government has a very strict following of the students who are in other countries. And I know that because they told me. And also because the way they interpret the world, when they wrote these essays of stories that we read in the Western perspective, and I looked at the interpretation like, wow, I would have never seen it like that, but it's like, that's how they see it. I was shocked, but I was like, I see, that's the way they see it, you know. And it also had to do with gender differences within the culture. And then I had Arabic students, right? And they also had many other differences. And I even had, you know, clashes, cultural clashes, historical clashes. For example, Japanese versus Korean, that they didn't like each other because there was a period of invasion, and all of those grudges are still in the mind of people. Same for Portuguese versus Spain, Brazil versus Spain. I also had students kind of like, you know, having these tensions, you know. And what I tried to do was to, you know, be a mediator in all of those situations and be a mediator of myself, you know, because as someone who is grading papers from people who are from other countries, your semiotic frameworks of interpretation are always there. Like, why is this saying that? This is crazy. And it's like, remember, this is another culture. It's not your own culture where there is right or wrong and so on and so on. So there are multiple possibilities. And when I taught American students, you also see lots of differences because in the US, more than in Colombia, you know that a state has laws, and it's like another constitution, and then there is another state with different laws, and then you have students who are very traditional. You know, things like they say, like, parents tell them, remember that those liberals are going to tell you to think differently. Whenever they say something, leave the classroom. And exactly like that, you have students standing up, standing and leaving the classroom, like, what's going on? And then I realized that it's because I was talking about gender, or I was talking about politics and gun control and stuff like that. So I try to problematize those things, but I was careful because there were people with different ideas. Though, you know, teachers have a lot of power, and many students don't dare challenge the teacher because teachers deal with grades. But that's what shouldn't happen, you know, that's not a healthy environment. So, and then in Colombia, then when I came back, I realized that I was in Bogota before going to the States. And then when I came back, I came to Cali. And then I found all of these differences because I had a fixed idea of the Colombians, but Bogotanos. And when I came to Cali, I realized, shoot, they have different conception about time, different conceptions about many things that I hadn't realized within Colombia. And of course, I had that intercultural mindset more active, more activated. And it's when I started seeing more things. What I'm saying, you know, if you don't have the intercultural microchip activated, you don't see many things. You see homogenization. You see homogeneous populations. When it's active, you start looking at, oh, look, this is why the person speaks like this. This is the person, why that person dresses like that. Why he enacts his identity and embodies this identity in certain ways and in some other ways. Yes. So they say, what would be different challenges in both cases? The challenge is for the teacher. You know, the challenge is for you to be interculturally open to all of these things and to be able to handle all of those little the invisible, as Carlo was saying, struggles that happen in the classroom that are not overt, you know, but are covered, and that people go by, but they still feel their self was affected, was violated. They don't say it, but that's what the human being goes away with, you know, like the way he was talking about this hurt me, you know. So it's about being very sensitive to all the diversities that there are in the classroom and that are not recognized because so many people are hiding them because they don't have the same exchange value.
Probably, Jose, you can correct me because I didn't teach abroad, but I think in the States, in some states, they tend to be more open to that diversity, and you can find like more acceptance of different things, different identities embodied, for example, in terms of gender or in terms of like ages. But here in Colombia, we tend to be more homogeneous. So one of the challenges is like, how do we help our students to embrace or to understand that even though they think we are in a homogeneous country, we are not homogeneous, and there is diversity. I think that's one of the challenges.
Carlo, you know what you're saying makes me think that yes, indeed, in the US, you feel like there is identity, this respect for identity or different expressions of your own identity, but I think it's highly regulated by law, you know,
Okay.
because they say like you can dress whatever you want and you can exercise or enact, deploy any identity you have. Nobody can tell you anything because if you say it, that's harassment, that's profiling. And so people are very afraid and respectful of law, right? And I don't necessarily feel that it goes inside their hearts.
Yeah, it's not in their mindset.
Yes.
It's just because the law says.
Yes, I'm everybody, but I when you look at the news of what's going on in the US and all of the discrimination that's taking place and all of this, you realize that there's respect for law, but not necessarily respect for the individuals' diversities.
Okay.
It varies from state to state too.
Right. All right, we have another question. I lost it. I would like to know if you have done research in the classroom by which you take your students to develop a strength intercultural competence along with the students from across the globe.
Have you done it?
Well, not with the students from across the globe. I would see it like probably when you do these projects of pen pals or like when we have, but what I did was to work with my students at the university, working with interculturality, yes. The issue that I see, or let us say, intercultural competence is not developed overnight. So let us say that I work with them for 3 semesters, 1.5 years probably, or 2 years. But then the results I didn't see at that moment. I mean, I saw some results at that moment, but I saw more results later when I found them then, like, I don't know, 1-2 years after, when they were taking another class with me, and I, depending on what they said and what they commented, I was like, okay, so what I did had some results now as well. There were some changes in mindsets. Some question of prejudices and so on and so forth, but I cannot say it can develop overnight, and I have done it with students from across the globe. Have you?
Yes, I have, and but I would like to mention that the project you carried out is a great work. Because I've read it, and I think you did a very impressive work with the students of your Licenciatura. And when you're saying that reflection of that you cannot expect to see students to show immediate results as far as developing intercultural skills or capabilities, that's totally true. You know, that's the great fallacy of the intercultural models, and in general of the concept of assessment that we have believed. You know, they have made us believe that something is taught, and then something is learned, and something is shown. And something is taught, maybe it is appropriated, and maybe it is shown, and maybe it is embodied, you know, because what you're saying is they are embodying it, you know, they are enacting it. And so you can see it by a couple of semesters later, when they have been able to, when those discussions sat in their minds, and they say like, okay, I want to appropriate it, I want to do it. And that's very good, impressive. So I did conduct research, telecollaboration, or telecollaborative research with students from Universidad del Valle. Actually, we initially had 3 universities doing telecollaboration. We were using a social network for language teaching and learning, like Mocha Buzu. And we were gonna do it 3 universities, but at the end only 2 universities, Universidad Javeriana, Universidad del Valle. We had 4 courses, 4 language courses, working on the language learning website and connecting with speakers of other languages across the globe. And so you say it did develop. I would say develop, because, you know, what I've been arguing also is that we cannot talk about how much they learn, but we say what we have to look at is evidences or indications of development, you know, indications of development. That's the only thing you can tell, you know, like, oh, look, this attitude, the way you responded to this person, the reflection you carried out is an indicator that you're on the way of developing intercultural capabilities. But that you can't say anymore, because look, this is very humane. You can be very competent interculturally speaking today, but tomorrow you can be a total dick speaking with another person and showing very little respect for diversity. And it has to do with your state of being at the time and so many other things. So you can be competent right now, but tomorrow you may not be. But overall, you may say like, oh, I usually behave, I showing indications that I am interculturally aware. So the research that I developed showed that students developed, you know, factual information, which is part of being competent interculturally speaking, but they also develop openness and awareness. What we found is that the element of critical intercultural awareness was not very present. And it's because we were not intervening that much in those interactions. We let them, you know, we just let them do whatever they wanted to do in the chat with those foreign speakers. And that didn't come. So the critical part is up to the teacher. The teacher is the one who has to bring up all of those discussions and make students go a little beyond the regular interpretations.
Yeah, it's, as you said before, it's about being sensitive about that. Yes, how to get that how. I agree. I do agree with you. Okay, let's see our third question. Oh, thank you, dear audience, for your questions. They are really good. And we have more.
Yes, yes, we have one, a big one. I don't know if you have read it. I sent it to you by Professor José Vicente Abad, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to read it?
Yes, yes, yes.
It is a long question, and it's a polemic one.
I know. That's why I wanted to, you know,
to what extent an excessive emphasis on the symbolic and cultural deconstruction and resignification of the body, particularly as regards the recent conceptualization of gender, could be contributing to the denial of natural differences between males and females, that instead of being celebrated and embraced, seem to be leading new generations to the desperate need to intervene and modify the body, even to the point when they can no longer recognize themselves. Rather than accepting that there are masculine and feminine aspects in all of us, it seems that members of young generations are being pushed towards the necessary alteration of the body. New forms of gender identification come out every year, and declaring them has become a form of exotism that gives popularity. Whatever happened to acceptance when change appears to be the only acceptable way to fit into these new forms of power? How does interculturality address these complexities that clearly should not be reduced to new forms of black or white? Wow. Okay, this is a complicated question. Gender is something, is a concept that always creates like this division, or that is problematic to analyze. I'm not advocating to anything in particular, but I want to point to certain cases. I don't know if you have read about an athlete named Caster Semenya. She was I think she's, I don't know, she's from Australia or from an African country. She participated in the competition, in a athleticism competition for women, but then she was disqualified because she had some characteristics of men, like the chromosomal charge was more of a male than a female, but her genitalia was female. So my point there is, what is, I mean, can we say that it is completely natural, that difference between male and female? For example, in that case, or when there are intersexual cases, right? I understand what the professor is saying here, because for some young people, I'm not saying for all, becoming, let us say, saying that your sexual orientation is bisexual or gay or pansexual, it's becoming a fashion. But I think that for the people who truly have issues with their sexual identification or their gender identification, that's not a fashion. I mean, it's something that is important for them, and it has to do with how comfortable they feel in themselves, right? So I think this is complicated. There is not a definite answer. In the case, I mean, what I discuss with my students is like there is a need to deconstruct how we understand homosexuality and sexuality in general, because we think of this homosexuality like a standard, right? Like a homosexual man is the one who wears pink, speaks with a lisp, has a broken hand, and is a hairdresser. But there are many different ways to be a homosexual man. Or the same way if it's a lesbian woman. She doesn't necessarily have to be a camionera, as they would say in the language, right? Like she looks like a butch lesbian and wears men's shirts, pants, and has a wallet. I think we have to make people, especially young people, aware that gender construction and sexual orientation are not like fashions, but it's something that is related to their identity, and that it is very important for the people who have these differences, for example. That would be my comment. I'm sure I don't answer the question, but I wanted to problematize it, okay? Jose, you want to say something about this?
Yeah, this is very complex, but I totally agree with your view. And I'm thinking of, I don't know, guys, if you've ever read this book by Agustín Fuentes called La Chispa Creativa. He reviews and updates based on latest scientific developments, all the history of humanity. You know, how we became, how we constructed sexuality, gender, how we became communities, and everything is so incredible and really backed up by research. And one of the things that struck me when I read it was that he says, of course, we have a biological sex, you know, which is determined by genitalia, right? But also, but some other features that we cannot deny, and I think Jose Abad is mentioning that. And whenever they look at like, what are the things that really distinguish men and women, it's like, okay, men tend to be stronger, you know, physically stronger. And all of this has evolutionary trajectories. When you look at the evolution of what men did in earliest times, and the division of work between men and women. At some point, the division of work started marking gender identities or gender assignments, you know. And so there are things that are physical, that are biological, that make us different, you know, and nobody's going to deny that. And we are not denying that men tend to be physiologically built to, for example, work as a, I don't know, as a builder or something like that, you know, because there is an evolutionary trajectory that it may change in I don't know, 100 generations. It may be different, but that's how our evolutionary trajectory has happened. And then when he looks at when all of the studies about what makes a real, in terms of sex, you know, they say like, there's no one who is really, really macho and hembra, because there is like this spectrum in terms of chromosomic load, you know, and like the spectrum is not here or here and then, is moving in between that. So we have things that are like more taking us to be more, have more features of the other sex and more here. So, and maybe this is why some men are more, tend to be more, to do more things that affiliate with women behaviors, no? But overall, this is all a social construction. I mean, for me, there's no natural, there's nothing natural. Everything is conventionalized by human beings. It's a social construction. And when you read this book, you realize that, yes, there are things that have become innate because of evolutionary trajectories, but all of them at some point became regularized, right? Mm-hmm. And then culture simply make you believe that's the way it is, and that's natural. No, that's not natural. That's how we have been doing it. And it became supposedly natural, but because we tend to think that natural is some kind of entity that is outside of us, you know, that's because of nature. No, it's not nature. It's us who made it and we believe in it, right? It's not some entity that is outside of us believing that's nature governing. It's what we believe, how we create. It's a human creation, and this is something that Foucault used to say, you know. So what I think is that gender is not alone, you know. I believe that this new idea of intersectionality is very important. You know, this idea that is all categories in human beings don't happen separately. They are all together. Gender is crisscrossed by ethnicity, race, by social class, and so on. You know, like it's easier for a person of higher class to come out of the closet, as they say, right? Mm-hmm. But it's not as easy for someone who is a lower class person, right? Absolutely. It's not the same for a Black person to come out, because there are different semiotic resources associated to being men in the Black community, right? Mm-hmm. And that charge is really heavy on men, and so on and so on, you see? And so it's not only gender, it's a host of different intersectional categories, social categories that compose the idea of gender. And I think that, as Carlo was saying, if someone is really having trouble to know how to identify himself, and gender is a social category, but it's an individual category. I mean, if I wanna be whatever I wanna be, as long as I don't affect you, you know, as long as you stop eating because I'm dressing this way, I don't have any problems.
I want to add something, and it's the fact that I think it's the traditions that we have also working scientifically, and is that we tend to work in binaries. So you are one thing or the other, what Jose was saying about the extremes. So I like that recommendation, that book you recommended that shows that spectrum. It happens the same with the sexual orientation. Probably you have seen Kinsey's scale. Kinsey, the American sexologist, working with the Americans during the 50s, and he come up with a scale showing the degree of heterosexuality or homosexuality, and there were two extremes, but there were many in between. So we cannot say that it is completely one thing or the other. The other element is that, of course, we cannot deny the differences, but the problem is when we use the biological differences to make people seem inferior, right? For example, when we thought of women in the 19th century, they were considered hysterical. They were considered people who were not being able, I mean, who were not, men couldn't trust them because they were subjected to their hormonal charge, right? So their mood was changeable. That was valid at that moment, and it was validated by science, right? But if I say that today, probably, I guess many of the people that are listening to me would say, "What the hell is he saying? How is he saying that?" Right? Because science also evolves. That's what Jose was saying about being gender being a social construction, right? As long as we continue studying, as we continue researching, we come to new understandings of certain things. I want to take also something that Hilda says here. She says, it is not fashion. What happens is that more and more people are revealing who they are, whilst before people hid behind something created by religion. So some old, I would say old people would say, isn't now that everyone is gay and lesbian? No, it's not now that everyone is gay and lesbians, but that we are becoming a little bit freer societies in which people can be who they want to be. So they can be open about who they are. So it's not a fashion, but the fact is that people are becoming visible. So it seems that it's a fashion, but it is not. Right? Okay. I don't know if we have more questions or questions from Juan Camilo.
We have, but I don't know, Juan Camilo, we have two questions. I don't know if, well, I think that regarding schools, you have already talked about that, like if the school's inclusion or interculturality or both. I think that you have been giving hints. But there is this question asking if intercultural and acculturation, if they have like, in a way, similarities, or if they have been like misunderstood, right? And they are also asking you like to be kind and share articles, right, regarding critical intercultural studies or intercultural education in Colombia, in the ELT community, right? So like those are like three questions we have here in the Q&A thing. And we still have time, so
Okay, the first one was about acculturation, was it?
Yes, let me read it. It says, what should school apply? Inclusion or interculturality or both? That is one question.
Okay.
Then,
well, let's take that one. I think
okay.
that depends a lot on the school and on the mission and vision that they have. Because I've heard of schools whose educational project is focused on inclusion. So everything is related, as I said before, to people with disabilities or students with disabilities. So they work with the differentiation, and like specifically addressed to people with disabilities. I guess that the ideal situation, although I know that might be utopian, would be to work with interculturality as it embraces all populations, right? So it would help people with disabilities, but it would embrace Afro-descendant population, indigenous population, immigrants, people with different sexual orientation, so on and so forth. But so far, I might be mistaken, but I don't know any school who works with that perspective. What I have heard mostly is about inclusion. Jose,
Same
you want
here.
to say?
No.
I'm going to read the second one. Edison Lopera wants to know if like intercultural and acculturation have the same meaning or like the difference between that.
Jose, you want to take that one?
No, they are not the same. As I understand, acculturation is to is a relation. There in acculturation, there is a relation kind of like of power, asymmetrical, where you are somewhat forced to belong to a group by adapting their cultural practices, right? and the interculturality is dialogical.
I would associate acculturation with assimilation, like what you are saying about power differentials. However, when we study, let us say, when people ask how do we become part of a culture, is usually learned. So our parents and our school and the context teach us that culture. So in that sense, we could understand acculturation. However, I would go more for the assimilation one. You are
Sorry.
without.
Yeah, that happens all the time. And the third one is asking like, well, first, thank you for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. And Camilo Andres Dominguez would like to know if you have some suggestions, regarding articles with intercultural and education or critical intercultural in Colombian ELT community, right? So
More.
that is not a question. It's like a favor.
Well, recommend yourself.
Yes,
Okay.
it would be. Read me. No, I don't want to say that.
Oh, but I am good.
Let me do it. Yes.
I was going to do it. Please read Carlo, Granados, Beltrán. I have been looking for some of your articles, so I'm going to start reading so I can share with the person what I have found.
Thank you. Also, I think, of course, Jose, I think he has also some things about interculturality that could like work, and go to the sources like Walsh, right? Catherine Walsh, the one we were mentioning before. There is I forgot the name, Vera Maria Candao, that is a teacher from Brazil. She's working with this critical perspective. And well, I don't have the name here right now, but there are many Brazilian teachers working for with language, English teacher education, with this critical perspective. Probably if Jose recommends, meanwhile.
No, I was thinking because it seems like the question is more about like Colombia ELT.
And Colombian
And
ELT, there are very few.
Yeah, very few. So you are writing on that. You've already have a couple of articles on that. I have a little bit of it too. Jaime Usman,
yes,
written
Jaime
a little
Usman.
bit about that. And possibly Berta Ramos.
Yes.
And who else is writing on intercultural?
Nancy Carvajal.
Oh yes, Nancy. I think within along those lines is Jimena Bonilla and Ferney. What is his name?
Ferney Cruz.
Ferney Cruz. Yeah. So this is a I would say, because look, most of this has emerged in the general field of the colonial studies, you know, and the area of literature is more developed in as far as developing post-structural, post-colonial, and all of that. But in Colombia, it's mostly a few people who are starting to dig into the topic.
Let us say that there is like a recent shift, right? It's not something that has been at work for very long, but it's just recent. There are many resources coming from philosophy. For example, Santiago Castro Gómez, that is Colombia, and Eduardo Restrepo, that is from, I think he's from Popayán, I'm not sure.
Universidad del Cauca, is from University of Cauca, with Axel Rojas.
Exactly, those are Colombian, but they are not in the field of ELT, right? That's not English language teaching, that's philosophy. So I think that there is a lot to do and a lot to write with these explorations that we're making as teachers, right?
Yeah, so I'm gonna paste a couple of names if you guys want to dig into the colonial studies. These are the people that many of us are reading, you know. Here, Catherine Walsh, Aníbal Quijano, Walter Miñolo, Santiago Castro Gómez, Ramón Grossfogel, Silvia Rivera, Quasicanqui, Eduardo Restrepo, and I think the Puerto Rican that I forget his name, the one who talks about the coloniality of being.
Maldonado Torres.
Oh, sí. What is his first name?
Bad memory. I don't remember. Nelson.
Okay,
Nelson Maldonado
right.
Torres.
Right.
And Enrique Dussel in Argentina.
Oh, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes. And Vera Maria Candao.
I think, but in Colombia there are very few, as Jose was saying.
Those were the questions that we have right now.
Thank you.
You see. So Juan Camilo, Aldemar, and Jose Aldemar and Carlo, we have like 18 minutes. So I don't know if we are going to move to like the closing part of this discussion. So far, I don't see any other question. We have right now 131 participants, and for us, for our Licenciatura program, that is like something that makes us really happy, because it's like we are opening these spaces for like conversation in a natural way, like building ideas together, and we really appreciate like the two of you being here with us. We know it's not easy. We were like saying to Carlo at the very beginning that if we were in Medellin, I mean, it wouldn't be like possible because of time, tickets, hotels, and things like that. So we thank this crazy pandemic for this, okay? So Juan Camilo, I don't know if you have like a
I would like, sorry, Claudia. No, I would like to ask them if you can just like provide us with some conclusions about this conversation.
Or some invitations. I would like that to be called like invitations to teachers, right? Here we have mostly English teachers, but it is true that we are a community, so it's not invitations just for ESL or EFL teachers or ELT communities, like an invitation for the teaching community in Colombia. And actually we have one person here from the United States. So I think that for the teaching community.
Well, I think that the fact that all these people are here is because there is an interest in the topic. And I think we can continue exploring, I mean, not only the theoretical aspect, that is what researchers do, but also the practical aspects. I think one of the core questions that Claudia made was like, okay, and how do we do this in our classroom, right? Explore different methodologies that have appeared, that coincide in many aspects for including people, meaning including like to becoming intercultural, like incorporating everybody, integrating everybody in our classes. One pedagogy is culturally responsive pedagogy, which talks about, well, using the semiotic resources as Jose was mentioning, frames of mind, maps of meaning, all the experiences that students have. There is another that came out as a response to people with disabilities, that is universal design for learning. I don't know if you have read about that. And even though that model is mostly, well, came like for responding to people with disabilities or to diverse capacities, what I have seen is that it coincides with many other pedagogies that aim at inclusion of different groups. So having diverse ways to show the input, diverse ways of representation, differentiated assignments, different tasks for getting the same objectives. So I think that there is a lot to explore, and an invitation as a teacher is to start trying things. I'm not saying no, everything at the same time, but like trying to explore and take little steps into what you can do in your classroom if you want to become interculturally competent, and to make your students interculturally competent as well.
Thank you, teacher Carlo. Teacher José Aldemar, please.
Okay, so, well, I think we have to start by, in our classes, encouraging the recognition of the diversity of diversities. I think that the ecology of the classroom needs to go through a process of co-adaptation, you know, because we want to say, like, we use the word like we want the students who are diverse to adapt, and I say the thing is that it's a process of co-adaptation. Mm-hmm. Those who are new will co-adapt, and those who are already there need to adapt as well to the new diversity. So so in a way that there is more openness to that diversity and dialogue and recognition. I also claim that we have to recognize that more than language, what we're teaching is meaning making. We're teaching communication. Mm-hmm. And communication, just like learning, is a multimodal, is multisensory, is embodied. Well, which means that learning is experienced physically, linguistically, emotionally, and artistically. And this is why I propose to work on multimodal pedagogies. You know, it's a pedagogy, it's a set of pedagogical practices that allow teachers to welcome all of the semiotic resources that students, or ways of meaning making that students bring into the classroom, and all of the cultural practices they bring to the classroom. So, and this is important to know about students' cultural semiotic repertoires, and see how they experience them, and see the exchange value between those cultural semiotic repertoires and the dominant hegemonic semiotic repertoires, or semiotic dominant systems. So I think that would be a way of welcoming that diversity in the language classroom, and facilitate what I say, the co-adaptation of the classmates and themselves to that new space.
Right. So, Teacher Aldemar and Carlo, on behalf of my academic community, I want to thank you for your fruitful presence during this meeting. We feel really motivated to keep on learning, and you have just provided priceless ideas to our practice. So thank you a lot.
Thank you for the invitation. It was a great discussion and a space to talk. And
yes, we are really, really happy. I am really happy. I don't know the others. I have to talk about Claudia Maria. And we really, really appreciate that you have been like open to have this conversation, right? We know that you are busy, but as I was saying at the very beginning, for Universidad Católica Luis Amigó and for our Licenciatura, creating these spaces, opening these spaces, that's why we call them Diálogos académicos, because it's not like who knows and who doesn't know. It's like how we are sharing, right? Our constructions, our deconstructions with the community, and how we are really growing. And I have enjoyed this. They are asking about the recording. So usually we ask the webinar managers for the recording, and if you see, we will be sharing it with Carlo, José Aldemar, and the teachers that are attending here. And if you write to me, I will send it to you. I'm going to copy my email, right? So I could be like sharing this recording with you. And I have to say, also thank to the participants. We have 125 people listening, interacting with you through questions, through comments, and this is like a very enriching exercise. So really, really, really thank you. And it was amazing. And of course, we're going to be inviting you again. Of course, I have to say it in front of everybody, so like it works.
Of course.
So I don't know if you have something else to say. Well, Esperanza says thanks to the presenter. And Diana Rego has like a last question here, and it says, what is the best practice for working on culturality in the classroom, right? And she says, because all students learn differently, right? So I don't know if we have like some hints to share with Esperanza.
Well, I have problems talking about best practices, because
Me too.
that depends on the context and on the people, right? But well, I would iterate what I said before. Know your students, become like familiar with them and their contexts. Think also of the school where you work or the context where you work and what they require, and then incorporate, well, some of the things that we have mentioned, right? Like using different ways of representation, using different materials, incorporating different stories, right? So I think it has to do a lot with the context and what you think your students require. And of course, what the school allows you to do.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think instead of, we could replace the idea of best practices by successful experiences, you know. So, and this is why one of the recommendations is, you know, like knowledge is always co-constructed, dialogical, and if the successful experiences you have are shared with the community, those can be not generalized, but could be adapted, or, you know, it couldn't reach the discussion of many other teachers, because we wanna see what works for you, and I am gonna try it based on my own conditions, as Carlo says. So yeah, that's I don't want to repeat what Carlos said, but it's more one of the sources of professional growth is also sharing what you do and what is successful in your classroom.
I think that we don't have any other questions. And again, thank you for being here, for sharing your knowledge and your constructions with Luis Amigó community and the other communities that are joining us today, because I have read people from other cities in Colombia. Actually, they were like chasing you. They were like, oh my God, we're having this chat, this dialogue with Carlo and José Aldemar. And so that's good. That's good, because it's showing that we are part of a community that is getting stronger. And we really...
Claudia, I just want an invitation, you know, in the same spirit of growing and constructing the community that we want to do in Colombia. It's an invitation for people to read our Colombian journals. You know, if we want to transcend that coloniality that's inherent, dominant in our country and in Latin America, we have to start valuing what we do in Colombia, you know. And so reading what the academic community does, the scholars, the teachers, participating more in some other venues that are not as official as journals, for example, in interest groups, participating in communities of teachers where they shared, they, you know, like send the narratives. This is what I did at work. These are the products of my students, and organizing more events for students to present what they do in the classroom. So it's not only validated by the teacher, but it's by a whole community that has the opportunity to see what students are doing in the other language, not as a way of saying I'm learning more English, but as well as saying I'm appropriating the world through another linguistic and communicative system that allows me to use my semiotic resources and show my identities through different resources. So I think that's important. So my invitation is visit Colombian journals, coming to these talks of people who are working in Colombia and thinking of what we do. It's also a great opportunity to grow as a community.
In the same spirit of what Jose says, the idea is that we all share. So participating in these events is also important, like showing what you're doing, telling people what you're doing. Of course, I cannot go without advertising annual Congress at Asocopi. So if you please be there, be present. We are willing and eager to listen to what you have to share with us. So those venues, for example, at Distrital, at Univalle, etc. So it's a great opportunity to share and to continue working with these discussions, right? So I think that's also important.
Carlo, and now that you said, it's not like we both prepared this advertisement
No.
But Carlo actually coordinates the interest group. We have special interest groups that dedicate to discuss issues, particular issues. He works on interculturality, and I work in the multimodal and called CMC multimodal pedagogies. But of course, my perspective is highly influenced and crisscrossed with interculturality. So look at the interest groups of the Colombian Association of English Teachers and join us and start new discussions with us.
Claudia also leads one of the special interest groups,
Claudia,
teaching English to young learners.
Oh, yeah, yes. And I was telling to Carlo this morning that we have been working with teachers in Sopetran and Jardín this year, and that we are inviting people to join our special interest group and also to join us, right? We were not planning this, but the three of us belong to Asocopi. Our university really cares about the efforts of Asocopi right now, and it is important to encourage this movement and this community of teachers in the country. Well, thank you so much. Y voy a cambiar a español. Los seguiremos invitando a ustedes, a otros profes, a los profes colombianos, a estos espacios que para nuestro programa de licenciatura son supremamente importantes. They could be in English, in Spanish. Lo importante es que estemos mostrando como comunidad cómo estamos creciendo y bueno, espero que hayan llenado por favor el formulario que ya está activo. Hubo un pequeño problema con él al principio, pero ya está listo y muchísimas gracias a Juan Camilo por liderar esta conversación y bueno, y a todos y que tengan un feliz almuerzo. Muchísimas, sí, no, ya es hora de almorzar. Muchísimas gracias.
Carlos,
muchas gracias. Gracias, José, gracias, Claudia,
muchas
gracias, Juan Camilo, y gracias a todos los que estuvieron
en el chat
presentes.
están diciendo algo, en el chat están diciendo que hoy a las 5 de la tarde hay un webinar de Asocopi sobre colonialidad.
Sí,
todos los jueves estamos teniendo de webinars. Uno de colonialidad hoy a las 5, los esperamos también.
Sí, la inscripción está en la página de Asocopi. Chao a todos.
Gracias a todos.
Chao, muchas gracias.
Chao.
Gracias, Juan Camilo, buen trabajo.
Gracias. Hasta luego, gracias.
Chao.
Ellos se van desconectando. Súper. Carlos, muchísimas gracias. Súper
Muchas
chévere.
Gracias. Salió muy bonito.
Sí, muy bonito, muy.
Preguntas chéveres.
Uy, complicadas, como wow. Súper.
Bueno, muchas gracias y nos veremos próximamente.
Sí, profe, nos estamos viendo. Feliz tarde.
Sí. Chao.
Andrés, me voy. ¿Estás por ahí todavía? Ok, ya.